With the basics of our ship upgrade and scoring system now complete, in this video we'll begin adding our asteroids to our game, along with our explosion effect and asteroid destruction effect. In the link in the description, you'll find the link to freely download the assets and scripts or macro we created in this video. Feel free to download them and follow along, dissect the macro, or to simply use the completed effect in your game or project. To begin, let's bring one of our asteroid sprites into our scene. If we look into our texture folder, under our sprite subfolder, we can see within our sprite sheets we have several different types of asteroids. The purpose of this wasn't supposed to be purely aesthetic. Instead, they were created so we can create asteroids with different kind of effects or movements. That said, let's start with one of our basic asteroids, and let's move and scale it to fit within our scene. Next, we want to change the tag of our asteroid sprite game object to enemy. Let's next add a sphere collider component to our asteroid game object, and let's adjust the radius of our collider so that it matches that of our asteroid. With that complete, let's now create a flow machine component and create and save a macro which we'll call asteroid rock basic. Before we begin, let's first go over mechanics that we want to create. For our movement, we want our basic asteroid to simply move down the screen in a straight pattern. However, if the player shoots the asteroid, we want our asteroid to then explode and break into small harmless pieces. On the other hand, if our asteroid hits our player, we want our player to then be destroyed, or if their ship is upgraded, we want it to then return to its base form. With that in mind, let's start by creating the node group of the asteroid getting shot by the player. We'll start with an on-trigger enter state, and much like our power-ups, we'll then transition to a compare tag node. But instead of a game object compare tag, let's use a component compare tag. And the tag we want to compare is laser, which is the tag we placed on our laser prefabs. We want that then to go to a branch node. And if our branch node is true, we want that to then instantiate an explosion effect. However, we currently haven't made an explosion effect, but for the time being, let's simply make its variable. Since we'll be using this effect in several graphs, instead of an object variable, let's make that a scene variable. For our instantiate position, we want to use the current position of the asteroid. So let's create an object graph vector3 variable, which we'll call current position. And after our branch node, before our game object instantiate node, let's add a set variable node. And for its input, we'll use the transform position from our collider. For our rotation, we'll simply use a blank quaternion literal node. After our game object instantiate node, let's create a wait for seconds node to have a brief pause before our asteroid breaks. After our wait for seconds node, let's create another game object instantiate node. And we want to now instantiate a prefab of the broken asteroid. Since many of the asteroids will have their own unique broken prefab, we can simply make an object graph variable which will house the broken prefab. For our position, we can again use the value of our current position variable and use a quaternion literal node for the rotation. Before our asteroid game object is destroyed, we want to use a custom event to send our add score event to our game manager. With our event sent, we can now create a game object destroy node, and we'll use self as our object input. And we'll also need to use our game manager variable for the target game object of our custom event trigger. With that complete, let's make our explosion prefab as well as our asteroid broken prefab before we continue. Like our ship's fire and upgrade animation, we can create our explosion effect by simply dragging the sprites from our sprite sheet into our scene. We can also use the different sprites in our sprite sheet as well as our scale and rotation to modify our explosion animation. Next, let's create our broken rock prefab. Since we don't have an animated sprite sheet for our broken rocks, we'll need to create an animation with keyframes using Unity's animation window. To do this, we'll start by bringing our sprites into our scene. Let's now open up our animation window and create and save an animation clip. With that complete, let's open up our explosion prefab. And on our prefab, we're going to add a embedded flow machine component. In this graph, we simply want it to destroy our game object once our animation is complete. And since we use those same mechanics for our logo and button display in our main menu graph, let's go to our main menu macro and simply copy it from our graph. Let's remove our game object set active node as well as our get variable node. And since this is a flow graph, we can't use an onEnter state event. Instead, we'll simply have a start event going into our get component node. On our get component node, we want our target input object to be self. And after our wait node, instead of a custom event trigger, we want a game object destroy node. We want our target input object to be self. And we want our start event to be a coroutine since we're using a wait for seconds node. Let's copy our flow machine component, and we want to paste that in our asteroid rock broken prefab. With both our prefabs complete, let's add our explosion and our asteroid rock broken prefab as the value of our graph variable. With that complete, let's test out our functionality so far. And so we don't have to wait through our main menu each time we test. Let's disable our main menu state machine game object. And in our game manager state machine, let's set our AG game super state to toggle start, and we'll toggle our start state off start. We can see that our asteroid functionality seems to be working properly. And once our asteroid is destroyed, it spawns both our explosion and our broken asteroid pieces. However, currently our explosion seems fairly large, and rather than destroying on impact, our laser continues to go after it's made impact and destroyed our asteroid. So let's start by first destroying our laser in our asteroid graph, and then adjusting our explosion animation. To do this, before setting our current position variable, we'll use a game object destroy node. And for our input, we'll use the output of our onTriggerEnter node to get our game object component. And just to assure that it stores our position before destroying our colliding game object, let's place our game object destroy node after setting our current position variable. And before we fix our animation, let's first test out our functionality we've just created. We can see that our laser is now destroyed after colliding with the asteroids. In our Asteroid Rock basic flow machine, after we destroy our laser game object, let's use a sprite render enable node so we can hide our Asteroid Rock sprite before spawning our Asteroid Rock pieces and destroying our game object. This way, it won't seem like there's a delay between the asteroid getting hit and the explosion. Now that we've modified our explosion and asteroid braking effect, let's add our asteroid movement effect as well. For this, we'll simply be using a do move on y-axis node and adding that to our start state. For our end value, we'll use -8, and for our duration, we'll need to create a scene float variable which we'll call asteroid speed. And let's start at 5 as our asteroid starting speed. And after our do move node, let's add a destroy game object with the delay node. And for our input object, we'll use self. And for our delay, we'll use our asteroid speed value. And to be sure our asteroid is clearly left the screen before it's destroyed, let's change our N value from -8 to -9. Now that we have the basic building blocks of our asteroid, in our next lesson, we'll implement our player damage.
Don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell to be the first to see this and many other tutorials, game development tips, and free game asset giveaways.